and welcome to the launch party for In My Heart, the Adoption Story Project. I'm your host, Marianne Combs, and I have the pleasure of serving on the board of Wonderlust Productions, the theater company that created this wonderful graphic novel about the complex realities of adoption. Before we get started, a few items of business. First, please mute your microphone. We will have time at the end for audience questions, which you will be able to submit via the chat box. So if you go ahead and mute your microphone now, I think that'll help make sure we can hear all the guests throughout the rest of the evening. And thank you. Also, the chat box is where you should direct your questions if you're having any technical problems. Wonderlust Managing Director Katie Bauer is monitoring the chat and will do their best to help you out. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge the many partners who have worked with Wonderlust to both create the play and now the book. Those partners include Ampersand Families, Camp Chosan, Children's Home Society of Minnesota, Connections to Independence, CUB, Concerned United Birth Parents, Minnesota Adopt or MN Adopt, our media sponsor, Rain Taxi, and Next Chapter Books. Many thanks to all of our partners, several of whom are represented here with us tonight and who will say a few words later in the program as we celebrate the birth of this new book about adoption. First, I'd like to welcome Leah Cooper and Alan Burks, Wanderlust's co-artistic directors and the co-authors of In My Heart, to the conversation. Yes, many applause for Leah and for Adam. If you can join me here in the spotlight. And, you know, Wonderlust Productions has a very interesting way of developing new plays for the stage. You've created plays about what happens at the state capitol. You've created plays about veterans, and you're working on a play about incarceration right now. Tell us a little bit about you, how you create these plays. Leah, can you talk a little bit about the process?
Sure, yeah. Well, we don't start with what a play is about. We start with who it's about. So welcome to all of you. You are the reason we make our plays, especially those of you in the adoption community. You're the reason we made this play. We start with a community that we think has amazing stories, but those stories are either unknown or misunderstood or mistold. And we work in partnership with people who are embedded in that community to invite people to share their stories with us. And then we do all these story circles that little by little, over almost 2 years, we turn into a play.
And Alan, I understand you're often the person crafting the words that becomes the play, but how do you go about that? I mean, in terms of taking all this material, Alan, you're a playwright, but there are things that you create from your own imagination, and here's something you're creating based on many, many conversations.
Well, I definitely don't do it alone. Leah and I have a lot of conversations, and anyone who knows me knows that I will tell them what's on my mind at any given moment if I'm trying to play. But the process that we've developed that we do, I'm often the lead writer, is after we have those story circles, we transcribe them and then we read through them and we highlight common themes or conflicts or myths or even just things that really struck us. We don't have any idea what we're looking for when we start the play, the whole process. We just think that these people have stories that are worth telling, that are super important. And then we put them on Post-it notes and we put them all over our office and different colors, and we organize them by themes. And we're really looking for both common themes. So with the adoption play, we found that surprisingly, actually we didn't find it, people found it with us in the story circles and the workshops, that adoptees and birth parents often carried around similar feelings of grief because there was somebody missing from their world, basically. And that everybody, all 3 members of the triad, actually had questions that they couldn't get answered. And so these are like things that overlap, and they're different for everyone, of course, but they overlap in order to make sort of where this community comes together. And then there are often myths that people believe. Often in this case, there was a lot of myths about birth parents that people believed, or adoptees and how they always feel grateful or they should feel grateful. And so we see a lot of those things, and then we hear the actual stories, and we find all of these things are kind of the key elements for any good drama. And then there's often conflict. We would have story circles. We were lucky enough to have birth parents and adoptive parents and adoptees all in the same story circle. And some adoptive parents talked about how afraid they were that the birth parent might appear. And I remember a specific story circle where a birth parent in the room, not somebody related to those people, said, I just wanted to know if my child was okay. And there was this incredible moment in that. And so they were like, well, that's something there's got to be in the play. And once we find these themes, we try to find a container that is entertaining, that will keep people engaged. So we often look for something to adapt. In this case, there was a lot of things about identity. People were often wondering who they really were. There's a lot of bureaucracy since adoption is a legally created category. And we started to think about Alice in Wonderland. All of our plays kind of follow this pattern. And then we use Alice in Wonderland in this case, or a different thing in another case, to sort of guide us, because these stories have survived because they have something in them. So whenever we get stuck, we go back and we look at what did they do in that story? And maybe it will help illuminate this, even though Alice in Wonderland isn't necessarily about adoption, sort of crazy trial that Queen of Hearts has became this wonderful part of the play. And so it helps us and it helps the audience follow the story because they recognize certain characters. And then we're always changing it in the rehearsal room with the members of the community to make it fit. So there's a million things I could say, but maybe that's the overview that you were looking for.
That's excellent. Leah, I'm curious to hear more from you about what it is about adoption that lent itself to compelling drama and to this sort of exploration.
Well, it was only our second big project doing work this way. The first project was with military veterans, and that was huge. We started that in 2011, realizing at that moment that we had been at war for 10 years and nobody was really talking about this huge divide between the civilian experience and the military experience, right? And so that was the motivation for doing that. And then after we did the veterans play, we were in love with making work this way because it really brought stories right here from our local community that people didn't know to life. And we were like, this is just great theater. So what should we do next? It was sort of like, yes, this is what we want to do. Who's the next community? And we made lists, but I think the reason that the adoption community rose to the top, the reason they landed on the list at all, frankly, was a coincidence. I think a friend of mine named Rachel handed me a book called The Women Who Went Away, the Women Who Were Sent Away. It's a book about birth mothers in the peak of the time when women were sent to homes for unwed mothers to go give birth in privacy and secrecy, and it was a very compassionate take on that experience. And she handed it to me because I'm an adoptee who hadn't given a lot of thought to that side of things, and so that getting handed to me right around the time that we were thinking about communities that we might make plays about, I was like, oh, hey, this is a huge community of people with amazing stories. And these stories they go right to the heart of who we are, our sense of connection to each other, our sense of family, our sense of where we belong. And even if you're not in the adoption community, and by the way, you probably are, because all of us probably know somebody touched by adoption. But even if you don't think of yourself that way, thinking about who we are and how we're connected to everybody else felt really universal. And as an adoptee myself, I definitely knew that people don't talk about it except for like these really shiny, happy, hallmarky stories like Little Orphan Annie and Anne of Green Gables. And I knew from my own experience that wasn't the story, so it rose to the top of the list because we knew the stories were compelling and we knew that traditional media was not telling the whole story.
Were there aha moments for you as you went through this process where you're like, oh, wow, I didn't even think about this. And this is something I've lived through?
Yeah, just a little. Yeah. There's so the theater company that I trained with in this methodology of making theater, by the way, we didn't invent it. There's theaters all over the country that make theater in this particular way. And I trained with a theater company called Cornerstone. And I remember in my training, they said something like, you want to be careful about doing plays where you're part of the community. And it almost sounded like that moment in Ghostbusters when they're like, don't cross the streams, and I didn't really know why, but they made it sound bad, And when we finally decided to do this play, I was like, well, I'm sure that'll be fine because I don't really have that many feelings about adoption anyway. I actually said that multiple times. And then over the course of those 2 years, I started having tremendous feelings. And I think this is actually a common experience for at least adoptees, if not everybody in the triad, that at some point you start to become aware of some very complex feelings around identity and connection and even grief that maybe you weren't really even paying attention to because nobody told you that that's what that was, And so, yes, there were lots of aha moments, lots and lots. And they mostly came up when I talked to other adoptees, but it also came up when I talked to birth mothers. I remember one of our first story circles was with Concerned United Birth Parents, Cub, who's with us today. Hi, Pat. And I remember I was in a room full of birth mothers and they were all talking about their experience. And I mean, one, I was so touched that they came. I was so touched by their experience. I was so touched by how much pain they'd gone through, partly from loss, but also from stigma, from this awful shame that people put on them for no good reason at all, But the thing, I was actually not a great story circle facilitator in that moment, and this is that whole don't cross the stream thing, because I was so distracted thinking, if my own birth mother, who I knew nothing about, was 1/10 as amazing as any of these women, I want to know her. Mm-hmm. That just rocked me to my core, that realization.
So you've created this production, you turn it in, you based on Alice, or inspired in part by Alice in Wonderland as a framework, and you staged the show back in 2016, if I remember correctly, and then you're done. And so, Alan, tell me a little bit about the decision to take this play and to turn it into a novel, a graphic novel.
Well, it starts with the reaction from the community themselves. We felt good about the process all the way through, and we got good responses from people, and we were happy to do it. But as theater people, we are very much accustomed to, running to make a thing and then having a big adrenaline rush, and then that experience being a part of you, but moving on to the next experience. And that's not how the people who saw this play reacted. For many people, it was a revelation for them to see themselves on stage, or even better, it helped open up conversations that they had not been having before. Adoption is one of those things that people in the past have not really talked about that much. And so coming with friends or family, or even having family or friends see it and then talking to people that they know, really opened up conversations in ways that we felt really good about, and the community of people were sort of sad that they couldn't share it. And theater is a very expensive proposition, and it requires a lot of time and effort, and to just remount it, what didn't seem possible. So we spent a lot of time thinking about how we could continue to give to this community, because we had spent so much time with them and they had been so generous with us, and we had all these stories, and we had the blessing of being able to see so many different perspectives. So many people, when you're in the middle of something, can't see all those perspectives. And so we really felt we wanted to share it. But, scripts of plays are not interesting to read. Videos of the play are very static because they're different formats. We're not filmmakers, so we couldn't go out and learn a whole new, that whole new art form. But we talked about it a lot. We had brainstorming sessions. Could we do readings of the play in various places? And then I think one day, Leah was saying something about, she was on a board where they were funding a graphic novel. And it just was like a light bulb went off over both of our heads. Like, oh, that can be imaginative like theater, and that can but it's not real. It doesn't have realism like movies. It opens up your imagination, and but it's not as static on the page as a script. And we're like, that sounds great. Let's do that. Even though we had no idea how to do that. it's not easy. We thought that'd be easier than film for some reason.
A theater company goes into the publishing business. Sure,
Yes.
why not? Yeah.
But it, it was a method. And then we were thinking, it's a graphic novel is also intergenerational. It can be shared in that way. It can be given to people. It could really fulfill the purpose that we wanted to fulfill, and it could feel like an art form that we felt conveyed what we had created together. So it was like a revelation. And thank God Becca Hart exists so that she could help make that real, because we were sure that it was like the perfect thing and it was easy.
It's easy if you find the exact right person. And we're going to introduce Becca Hart into the conversation in a little bit. But first off, I just want to congratulate you two on creating the production that brought so many people together from different aspects of this community and brought them not just to the story circles, but actually came on stage and performed the show and lived it out and sort of embodied it. And alongside professional actors who are a part of the adoption community. But then to have that vision of like, oh, let's just turn it into a book and we can do that. We'll figure it out. And actually the timing kind of was perfect with the pandemic. I mean, to go from staging theater work to publishing, it seems almost like it was kind of meant to be.
Well, I think there was nothing perfect about the pandemic, but
okay, sorry.
Yeah, just to say, but I think we were already thinking about how can our plays live longer? How can they reach more people? How can they be less ephemeral? How can they be more accessible? In part because we already do theater for a wider diversity of audience than traditional theater. Like, we have people in our plays who've never been in a play before, and we have people in our audiences who've never been to theater before because they're drawn because of the community story. And so I think it just made us think more about how do you invite more people into the process than maybe we would have even been aware of if we were doing more traditional theater that tends to attract people who are very comfortable in that space. So we were already thinking, how do we just invite more people and how do we extend the conversation farther? And then, and I think, so one of the reasons we have people from the community in the play, and I need to make this clear, they don't usually play themselves, like play someone else in the community, if possible, not always, but they don't ever play their exact own story. And what happens is they're bearing witness to somebody else's experience, sometimes somebody else who's in the room with them, and what that does is it creates this environment in the rehearsal room of the sacredness of bearing witness, which then, first of all, it just makes us better because they're the first to tell us if we got it wrong. But second of all, it makes us really feel this sense of responsibility to keep sharing and keep perpetuating the stories. And so I think, we were already thinking along those lines before the pandemic, and then the pandemic happened. And I think everybody started going, how do we make things more accessible? And then the other thing is, I think, we've already shared with Marianne that I don't know if we would have ever finished this darn thing if not for the pandemic. So while it wasn't perfect, that was sort of the gift, because Becca, who you're going to meet soon, is not only an illustrator, but an actor. And she works all the time because she's so darn talented. But the pandemic meant she had a lot more time that she could sit at her desk and draw our pictures. So that part was very opportune.
Excellent. Now, I know that we have a couple of video clips, and Alan, could you set these up for us? Are we going to look at one and then come back and talk and look at the other, or are we going to set them both? Okay, and then
yeah, but
I'll
try to be brief, and then Leah will set up the second one.
Okay, great.
The first that we wanted to share was actually, I think about 4 or 5 scenes into the play. Most people probably know the premise because it's been on the flyers, but Louis and Alice are getting married and they have an engagement party where their parents meet for the first time. And Louis's parents don't have any experience or think they don't have any experience with people who are adopted, and they say some pretty insensitive things. Alice is also pregnant. And these two things, the marriage and the pregnancy, are bringing up feelings for her about family, which is a common story. People who don't feel like they have any issues around adoption suddenly start feeling strange things at important life events. And so she runs off outside the engagement party tent. she actually runs into like a bar that seems to be manned or helmed by a white rabbit kind of character who gives her a drink that says "Drink me," and then she runs farther into the woods, and her fiance Lewis and her sister Jen, who has come back from her own search from her birth mother from Korea, go out to see if she's okay. And that's an excerpt from the scene that we'll see first.
All right. And with that, we're going to queue up the videos that everybody can watch.
Alice,
There you are.
there you are. We've been looking all over. Are you crying? You never cry.
I don't cry. I didn't mean to make anyone worry. Why would I be crying?
Are you okay?
I just needed some air. I stopped at the bar.
You stopped at the bar?
I had a sip. Obviously, I'll be the worst mother ever.
Where is this coming from? Shu, my mom upset you.
Your mom's fine.
His mom is not fine, Alice. It's not fine.
Jen, can you not? She's right. For once, it's not fine. I'll talk to her. She just doesn't have experience with families that are different.
She's your mom. She doesn't think I'm good enough for you. She's probably right. She's worried about her grandchild. She's right to be.
What she thinks doesn't matter to me.
It should matter to you. You lived inside her for 9 months. You breathed with her. Her heartbeat and your heartbeat were one. She's with you forever.
What are we talking about?
She's talking about the feelings adoptees have, you idiot. Never being held by the woman whose body you knew best.
I know what she's talking about, Jen. Can you leave us alone?
Alice, you're
crying.
I am. I didn't realize I was. I'll stop.
If you're upset, I'm here.
You can't do anything for me. I'm just sad, apparently. Why am I still crying? Maybe I'll just drown in my own tears. Won't that be strange? And you'll swim away? Jen, you ever notice that look on Mom's face? That sad look, like she's grieving? You ever think she's grieving not having her own children?
yes.
She loves you and Jen more than anything.
I know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just sad because my birth mom was sad. Maybe I'm damaged.
You're the opposite of damaged. You're like a superhero. You're the most amazing, strong, wonderful woman I've ever met. Sometimes I think you must be an alien. Alice, when I said marry me, I meant forever. I will never leave you.
I just don't believe that. How do you know that I won't leave you first?
Alice. Jen,
What?
can't you see we're having a private conversation? You told me that you felt adoption was a gift. You don't have to be limited. You don't have to be limited by your birth family or your adopted family or anything. You can choose to be anything you want. You're free.
I thought that too, until I found myself with my own child to wonder about.
You'll be a great mother, Alice. I'm sure of it.
Must be nice to be sure of things.
I am sure.
But I don't know how to be sure of anything. I think I have a part missing in me.
It was me you were missing. Here I am.
Oh, Lewis, no.
Well, I'm the one standing here telling her I love you, but you both say that's not enough. How much more of this am I supposed to take without having feelings of my own? Oh, an elephant in the room.
No, it's a dormouse of grief.
This is a weird party.
I love the surreal element of this, which is very Alice in Wonderland, but its own thing, having an elephant actually in the room with this scene, as they're dealing with some very, very heavy issues.
Yeah, I think it was Penelope Needham, who was a wonderful partner in the making of this play, who said repeatedly, the elephant in the room with adoption is grief, and it is felt by every member of the triad. They call it the triad, right? The birth parent, the adoptee, and the adoptive parent. That everybody has experienced some loss. And Alice in Wonderland has a dormouse that keeps crying and being stuffed into a teapot. So it became an elephant of grief.
Actually called the Dormouse of Grief in Alice in Wonderland. And they try to run in order to stop crying. They try to run around because it'll make them stop crying or something. But anyway.
Yeah. So
We used to go back to Alice in Wonderland too and revisit it. It's just amazing. So Leah, there's a second video clip that
there's a second video clip. So what you just saw was early on in the play in the first act. And what we're going to show you next is pretty far into the second act. And by this point, we've met a lot of Wonderland characters. We've met the caterpillar, who is also somebody who aged out of foster care. We've met a bunch of playing cards, like the knaves, if you remember from Alice in Wonderland, and they represent all the bureaucrats involved in the bureaucratic system. We've had a whole history lesson on adoption that was explained to us by a philanthropist and a social worker. And the scene you're about to see is a trial. If you remember in Alice in Wonderland, the Queen of Hearts puts everybody on trial. And we embraced this scene because in the world of adoption, there is no shortage of judgment. There is lots of judging whether everybody did the right thing and everybody did what they should have done. And it's a shame. It's one of those ways that hurt people. It is sometimes even in our pain, we judge each other. So in this scene, you're about to see the Queen of Hearts put everybody on trial, especially the parents. In this particular scene, you're going to see the adoptive parents really confronted with a lot of feelings. And it's one of those things where the adoptive parents have the most choice in the matter, but they also end up sort of receiving a lot of the judgment for things that maybe they didn't have control over either. So that's a lot of what you're about to see play out. I'm looking at my little cheat sheets to see if I left anybody out that you're going to see. You're going to meet Uncle Eddie. Uncle Eddie is like Alice's favorite uncle. And he was played by Adam, who's been running these videos even as we speak. So Adam, will you cue it up, please?
Someone told you that adoption was a one-time event in your past, when it's really an ongoing part of your life.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't.
Oh, goody. Let's have a trial about it.
Call in the jury!
The jury!
The jury!
I don't want to have a trial.
I'd like a trial.
Somebody stole your hearts, my dears, and we're going to punish them.
You don't even know if anyone committed a crime yet.
What does that have to do with it? Bring in the guilty.
You can't have a trial if you already know the verdict.
She's always acted superior, like her adoption made her special.
The Honorable Queen is presiding.
Order in the court!
A trial! So exciting!
Evening.
Jen, I think we should get out of here.
I like it here. People are finally acting the way I feel.
You don't mean that.
What do you know about how I feel? We're not even related. We only know each other by accident.
Now, off with her head.
She's not on trial, Your Majesty. She's the victim.
I am not a victim. You don't even know how to have a trial. Where's the jury?
Same place as the guilty and the accused and the witnesses.
That doesn't make any sense.
Who's talking about money?
Sense, not sense. It's not rational.
Who's talking about being rational? We're talking about hearts. Read the accusation.
Our queen, so smart, she made some hearts all on a summer's day. In fits and starts, they stole the hearts and sold them all away.
Off with their heads!
Off with his head and her head.
Off with their heads!
Jen!
They shouldn't have adopted these children, Alice. They stole us from poor people.
The children needed homes.
The children needed homes.
You don't know for sure. When I went back to Korea to find out more about who I am, they acted like I was an unreasonable customer.
No refunds.
We don't know anything.
We're busy.
They don't actually care about what children feel.
It didn't start out that way. We were simply trying to make things right after the Korean War. 40,000 children of American GIs and unmarried Korean women who were abandoned and ostracized.
You create a problem that only an army can create, and your solution is to colonize the children?
We're a gay couple.
Back then, we had to go outside the United States to have a child.
Off with their...
No. If the laws deny people their human dignity, then
I'll decide whose dignity the laws protect.
This country has been stealing Indian children and brown bodies for hundreds of years. That cannot be ignored.
You just wanted to be a mother no matter what.
I did want to be a mother, desperately. And you wanted a mother, Jen. Do you remember your first school play, Jen? You were maybe 5 years old and you saw all the faces looking at you on stage and you started to cry and you said, I want my mommy. And that was me. I was the one who comforted you. I was the one who made you feel loved.
I remember that you kept me at a distance.
I didn't. You don't remember because you were so small, but I remember every moment of your life. You may have other mothers, but you're my only daughters.
Someone is guilty.
We adopted from Eastern Europe so we wouldn't have to worry about the birth parents. Baby Jessica was really taken from her adoptive parents.
That's not a typical story.
It's a true story and an awful story. We thought it was best for everyone if there was no confusion.
Listen, I'm a bleeding heart. Intellectually, I understand what you're talking about, but our child had no place to live, and we fell in love with her, and she fell in love with us. Were we supposed to leave her in poverty? Her parents abused her. They neglected her. Were we supposed to leave her there?
Look, race and skin color are not the issue. My kid is from Honduras. He texts me because he's freaked out about going to the dentist. Race is not the issue.
I would never have interfered with my son's life with his adoptive parents. I just wanted to know my child was alive and what he looked like and that he was happy.
Thank you for that. And now I'd like to welcome into the conversation Becca Hart, our illustrator and creator of the graphic novel. Becca, welcome and congratulations.
Hi, everyone. That was awesome. I haven't seen that yet. That was really cool.
Well, it was really cool. And a lot of it was, so much of it is your amazing representation. And I just think it's so fascinating that you are somebody who performs regularly on Twin Cities stages. You are a talented actress, performer, actor, and you have that side of things. And then you have your artistic talent. What was it like to work on a project where those two worlds collided?
I feel like I've been training my whole life for this moment. This is I've done other little illustration things for theaters in town before. Like I've done some big 2D props for like the Children's Theater or the Minnesota Jewish Theater Company. I've done like backgrounds and design for the jungle and things like that, marketing pieces. But this was something really kind of entirely different because it was taking the theater as a medium and like putting it in this other format that I happen also to really, really love. I've kind of been really into reading and making comic books since I was in first grade.
Yeah. And so usually we talk about something going from the page to the stage, but in this case, it was the exact opposite. What were the challenges that you faced? I mean, how did you approach this idea of taking something that had been created specifically for the stage and had music in it, of all things, and then taking that and turning it into a graphic novel?
Oh man. Well, first, just kind of linearly in a line.
Linearly? Yeah.
Completely. Emily approached me, and when I said yes, let's give it a shot, they just gave me the script like I was one of the actors. And so the first thing was to figure out what the characters looked like. And fortunately, they already had an amazing cast that they wanted to create on the page. So that part was pretty easy. It was just making everyone look super cool in cartoon form. But then it was a matter of breaking the script down into pages, into not only, oh, this line is going to go here, but what, like when you open up a comic book, what's like the biggest image on that page? Like what's the emotional point on that page? And that was kind of how I started with the script. I would read through, and when there was a particular moment, like in the scenes we just saw, like when Alice starts to cry, I was like, oh, that's huge. And so I knew that that would go in a big spot on the page. And then I would kind of connect big dot to big dot, just filling in with the spaces like that. And that was really cool. And it also gave me and Alan and Leah a chance to emotionally track the piece, because it was really bringing focus to not only the journey of the story, but also the big emotional parts of the whole adoption story project, which was cool. And sometimes I got it wrong. Sometimes I was like, oh, this is a song about being angry. And they were like, and I would draw the whole thing and they'd be like, actually, no, it's a song about being proud. And I was like, oh, a little bit different. So I'd go back in and kind of like reframe some things and do some different body language. And the songs were actually the trickiest part, because we wanted to make sure that we could give the reader the feeling that you get in an audience when the people on stage start singing and you're like, oh, something different and wonderful is happening. So we played a lot with that visual language. You know, is it a different artistic style? Are the boxes different? And we decided that going from typed text to handwritten text would be a big like visual, like, oh, like breath of fresh air. So when you get to the songs, all the things being sung are in like big loopy handwritten letters. And when they go back to dialogue, you're back to typed. So that was cool to discover.
Yeah, and very effective. It really works well in the graphic novel. And were there points in the book where writing the graphic novel gave you a certain freedom or liberties that you didn't necessarily have on the stage with the play?
Yes, fun fact, when you're drawing with a pencil and paper, your limit for sets, there is no budget. You can be as like wherever you want to go. And so I can remember we were talking about the scenes in the garden, and I'd be like, well, how about this? And then Alan or Lee would be like, well, in the stage, they just walked off stage. And I was like, Alan, like we can have topiaries in this garden. Let's go. So like make your sets as big as they want to be. Like we have the money to fall into the abyss. We have the money to hire an elephant to do a dance on roller skates. Like we can do whatever we want. So that was really fun to kind of not only take where the play had been on stage and the imagined sets, but also just like, let's make that even bigger, and where else can we go?
Having spent all this time with the material and crafting this really beautiful book out of it, what do you hope people take away from the story of In My Heart and from this body of it?
That's a really good question. I just have to echo what Alan and Leah said. Like this piece was originated and the inspiration was for the people of it, not the concept, but just like the people who inspired it. So I hope that anyone who has brushed even remotely against the adoption narrative in their lives can see this book and feel, if not that it provides answers, that it provides companionship and makes you feel less alone and maybe more heard, which is what everyone needs. And as someone who had very little personal interaction with the adoption experience, I'm just so grateful for this knowledge and this awareness. And I feel like it's just opened my doors to be able to talk to the people in my life about that. Like, I don't feel afraid to ask them about that huge part of their life. And other than that, I really am excited for anyone walking through a bookstore who might not even know what they're picking up to just be excited by the cover. And then once they get into the art, just start to realize all the layers of the story. So I'm excited for the knowledge it will bring people, and I'm excited for the pretty pictures, both.
Excellent. Well, Becca, thank you. And again, congratulations. I mean, what an accomplishment. And it's really a beautiful book.
I'm honored to be part of the team.
Awesome. Next up, I'd like to welcome Megan Kim to the conversation. If you saw Wonderlust production of In My Heart, you'll recognize her as one of the lead actors. She played the part of Jen, Alice's sister. And you also heard her voice in those video clips playing the part of Jen. And Megan, if you can join me here in the spotlight, there you are, wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. And, you know, I understand when you auditioned for the part of Jen, you actually really connected with the character. It wasn't just like, oh, I could play this part, but it's like, oh, I am this person.
Yeah. When I saw the listing on Minnesota Playlist for the audition, the first instinct was like, because it said adopted Korean, raised by white people, little sassy, has a chip on her shoulder. And I was like, okay, I can just walk in and be myself. And I don't think until I really got into like rehearsals and really getting deep into the character that it opened all this like stuff that was inside me of like really understanding what each of those elements mean to me and who I am as a person, like how much each of those are actually a part of me as an adoptee.
So what was it like wrestling with those issues? I mean, as you're going through the process as somebody who has a very intimate connection to this story, but then you're also being introduced to all these other people who have connections to the story from different vantage points, whether they're birth parents or adoptive parents. How did that change or affect your perspective?
I was nervous at first because at the time I was also working through my own things with my adoption and whatnot. But honestly, like day one, I looked around and like you go around and you introduced yourself and like your connection to the community and whatnot, and just seeing the different aspects of the adoption community that was being represented in the cast, and then getting to have conversations with them and learn their story and, you know, how they feel about the adoption, the subject of adoption, was actually just really beautiful. Like I was worried it was going to be really too intense and that I would shut down, because I'm a person who shuts down when things get too real. But it really like touched me. And I looked around, I was like, these are my people. Like everyone, even though we have completely different stories, these are all my people. We are all together as one. Yeah, it was beautiful and life changing.
I'm curious, you told me in a previous conversation that you asked your mom not to see the show.
I did. Yes. Because I am very much like Jen, and some of the things that Jen said, rang very true, because there's a lot of truth in the words that Jen says. And I was just a little worried. My mom's not really a theater person. She doesn't really understand much about, the difference between reality and acting. And I was a little worried she wouldn't understand, even though those words were true for me. I didn't want to hurt her and have it be like, we're having this conversation while I'm on stage in a play, as opposed to having the conversation face to face, one-on-one about these issues. I'd rather keep that in private and not have you learning all this stuff in front of a bunch of other people.
Yeah, that could certainly be traumatic.
Right.
So I'd like you to stay with me and now invite into the conversation Heidi Wisty. Heidi is the Senior Director of Adoption at CHLSS. Almost a decade ago, Children's Home Society of Minnesota and Lutheran Social Service of Minnesota merged their adoption and foster care programs under the name CHLSS. Thus my referring to it that way. But Heidi Wisty and her organization was very much a partner in the creation of In My Heart. Heidi, thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Nice to join you.
Yeah. You know, in addition to being the senior director of adoption, you also have a very personal connection to the adoption story.
I do. I'm an adopted person. I was adopted from South Korea. I was actually adopted through Children's Home, and I've worked at Children's Home for over 20 years in lots of different roles and different programs. So I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation. And I watched the play when the play was happening, and those scenes from the novel just reminded me of all of the different stories and representations that were alive in this, and really something we see every day.
Yeah. And, you know, you mentioned both of you are Korean adoptees, and 40 years ago, a lot of the adoptions that were taking place in Minnesota involved Korean children. I'm wondering, how has the face of adoption changed since then? What is that community? What are the children who need placement? What do they look like now? What are you working with?
That's a great question. So we'll take the next 8 hours to talk about that. What I will say is that adoption has changed an incredible amount over the decades. And I think we still look at this through the eyes and the lens of safety, permanency, and well-being. That is the hope for all kids that we are hoping to work with who are in need of families. And we've seen an 87% decline in international adoptions from 23,000 down to less than 3,000. Things are changing. Countries are creating infrastructures where they're hoping to care for kids domestically and within country. We're finding that some countries like Colombia are very successful in finding homes and adoptive families for young children. And in an interesting way, children internationally and children in Minnesota are very similar. We are seeing the children who need permanency to be older, teenagers, sibling groups, children of color from the BIPOC community. We're really seeing that the needs that children are bringing, the trauma histories, the neglect, we're learning a lot about the impact that has on their brain development. And we're just learning a whole lot, and we continue to do that. And at our organization, we support expectant and birth parents, and we want to help families make the decisions that are right for them. We're preparing adoptive families. We're not skirting around difficult conversations. And I think, you know, in this play and in the novel, it talks a lot about some of those taboo subjects that people weren't comfortable talking about. And I think when we're talking with adoptive parents, adopted siblings of adopted persons and adoptees, we need to hear how people are years later and what's important for us to be teaching people from the very beginning when they express interest, so that eyes are open. We're having these hard conversations because we want to help as the story happens, right? It hits at all different waves and development and relationships and all of these different times in our lives. And so we want to make sure that we're helping families have those conversations early on.
Yeah, as you point out, this story raises so many complex issues, and there are layers of trauma and grief that are dealt with. Whether it's on the part of the birth parents or the adoptees or the adoptive parents. I'm wondering, is there a way for this to not be a traumatic story, that for there not to be grief in this story? Or is this a story that it's just about, you know, when we talk about providing these services, obviously it's not ideal for a child to be separated from its parents. And so it's just a matter of how much better can we make this, and what services can we provide to ease the trauma of that transition?
Marianne, you ask amazing questions. And it really, when we were talking before, it really made me think about how to answer some of these pieces. We have a post-adoption services program, and it's kind of a misnomer because we do things pre-adoption as well. We know families are coming to us, and we're hoping to create trainings and discussions and services for people lifelong. So whether they're in the beginning stages, whether they have placement of a child, or whether it's years after, we're really hoping to provide those supports. And I think one of the things is, does it have to be traumatic? Maybe, maybe not, right? We've heard there's so many different stories. In over 130 years of our agency providing these services, we've heard lots of different stories and lots of different experiences. And each individual is so different, and their own history and what they bring and how they develop and how things happen over time. And I think one of the things that does exist is adoption is full of complex emotions, and they surface and manifest in so many different ways, difficult, beautiful, all of these variations. And I think, to be honest, grief and loss are at the core of adoption. And I think it was named earlier when Leah was talking about the adoption triad or the adoption circle that encompasses siblings and extended family members. Grief and loss exists for all who are touched by adoption. And I think there are ways of healing and moving forward, but there's also the need to recognize it and to talk about it. And hopefully we are among those in the adoption community and those partners that you named who are creating those supports, so that there are resources and places and people for adoptees to talk to, and adopted parents and siblings of adoptees, so that we can all have those abilities and opportunities and accessibility to those conversations.
Megan, you were talking about your experience, that you also found your home through Children's Home of Minnesota. You were both adopted through Children's Home of Minnesota. And you also talked about some of the services that you experienced as a child growing up, that there was a choir that you belonged to of other adoptees, that there are ways that you were brought together. Are there other, I'm wondering, what was, for you, was that an important part of connecting and finding other people like you?
I think it was, but I didn't realize it till I got older. You know, like I was part of the Children's Home Society choir, so I got to go be in a choir with a whole bunch of other adopted Koreans. But I don't think I really realized how important that was, to be able to be around other people who not only look like me, but have the similar life experience already at such a young age. I also went to Korean camp when I was younger. And once again, I don't think I really realized, you know, getting to learn about my people, how important that would become as I got older. I think I was just too young at the time, so you didn't really fully process it. But now looking back, I'm very thankful that I got to even have those things, even though it wasn't that much really. You know, I wish it could have been more looking back, but to have just even those the little bits to look back on. I'm grateful for.
Starting point. Yeah, absolutely. Build off of. And Heidi, I think I understand one of the things that's changed over the years is now birth parents have a lot more control over where their child goes.
In our infant adoption program, it is expectant parents and birth parents who are selecting families. They're interviewing them if they would like to. They're creating relationships, and there's the ability to form a connection and to agree upon what that connection can look like over time, which is a wonderful thing to have in place. And again, everybody's very different, and I think the hope is that by forming this connection and being able to have some of those discussions, it can lay the groundwork for a future relationship, however it fits for everybody involved. And I just wanted to say, I think it's so interesting, Megan, that you're talking about the different ways that you were connected to the Korean culture growing up. And I think it's always funny for me to tell people, when I was growing up, the last thing I wanted to do was be connected to the Korean culture. And my parents would encourage me and offer all of these opportunities. And again, every individual is so different. I'd say, nope, not me. Don't want to do it. No, thanks. No, thanks. And here I am 20 years later working in this field and in adoption. So, you know, and I was able to travel back to South Korea. And I think just those experiences and eye-opening connections and opportunities just strike us in surprising times in our life.
Heidi, what do you hope people take away from this book?
I think it's been said before, I think to have it in a graphic novel form, available to children, available to teenagers, available to adults, it exists. They can read it together, they can talk. Everybody, it normalizes the conversation, and it's an opportunity for people to connect through the written words that will live on. And it's beautiful. Those illustrations are beautiful as much as the story is. And I think it's just a wonderful tool to continue this conversation and to help have these conversations be normalized and okay, and to say it's okay for people to have different experiences and different feelings about this as well.
Heidi, Megan, thanks so much for joining me and for being here tonight and sharing your thoughts and your experiences with us. We really appreciate it. Coming up in just a moment, we're going to bring all of our panelists back to answer your questions. So be sure to take a moment now to get your questions in the chat. But before that, I'd like to welcome our other partners who've joined us this evening to raise their hand if they'd like to take a minute or two to let folks know about their organization, the services they provide, and or their thoughts on this new graphic novel, In My Heart, available now. I think there's a link in the chat if you want to order it. So if you're representing one of our partner organizations, please click on the Raise Your Hand button under the Reactions tab, and we will call on you. Aha, I see a few people raising their hand. All right. Hello.
Hello.
How are you? Welcome. Eva, you are a board member of Camp Chosan, is that right? Did I pronounce that correctly?
I am. I'm so excited to be here. I loved that Megan plugged talking about attending a Korean camp herself. So I'm here on behalf of Camp Chosan, which is a camp that I actually grew up going to from nursery all the way through being a day camp counselor, resident camp counselor, a teacher, and now a board member myself. So it holds a special place in my heart for Korean adoptees, family members of Koreans, Korean Americans. I really think that the camp is opening a lot more to include all of the different people who may be experiencing the Korean adoption process. And I wanted to say, I really appreciate kind of what Heidi was talking about in terms of, I think the fantastic part of attending and growing up through a camp was the opportunity to hear all of the different experiences. And I think, Heidi, when you said that each of the adoption experience is unique to that individual, to the family, to the birth parents, to the adoptive parents, to the adoptee themselves. And I think it really gave me the opportunity growing up to hear those stories. And now as an adult to hear the stories of kids growing up and experiencing and processing it themselves. And it's really been a fantastic opportunity for me to expand my understanding and to learn that every experience is unique. And I know that the conversation right today has been a lot about the loss and the trauma, but really want to emphasize the beauty and the love that's also at the core of all of those stories. So appreciate you having me here today. Really appreciate having greater representation. I would have loved to have a graphic novel like this growing up that I could read myself and relate to and share with my friends so they could understand the experience as well. And I'm thrilled to be part of this experience. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you for joining us, Eva, and thank you for your partnership with Wanderlust Productions on this production. All right, thank you so much. And we have a couple of other people joining us. Hello, Jessica, welcome. And
hello.
Jessica is representing Connections to Independence, which, yeah, tell us more about what Connections to Independence exactly is. How
Yes. Yeah, so we work with youth and young adults, so 14 up until their 25th birthday, who are actually in and aging out of foster care. So not so much in adoption. I see our other partner, Michelle Chalmers, who I absolutely love and adore. It's kind of funny. So I was actually born into foster care and I was adopted, and now I work with foster youth. And Michelle aged out of foster care and is in the adoption sector of things, but we work together very well. But we work with youth and young adults who are in and aging out of foster care, so 14 to 25, and preparing them for life after the foster care system. So these are young people who typically don't get adopted or had failed adoptions. We try to work with Michelle, actually working on a new project with her around, I don't want to call it permanency, but building circles of support. So making sure that when our kids leave us, they have 5 to 10 unpaid people in their lives. But at C2I, we work on education, housing, employment, financial literacy, and personal wellness. And then we just added this new program component, thanks to a wonderful funder locally, the Sauer Family Foundations, to really make sure our kids are connected in communities and define what they call family themselves. So that's in a nutshell, but this book is amazing. We didn't get to go see the play because I think there was like a weather situation that we weren't able to bring our young people. So watching this today has really moved me as an adoptee as well. Just dealing, and I'm gonna get a little emotional here, but just the grief and loss that you just don't talk about that with folks. Met my biological family probably about 5 years ago. I met my biological mother and I have 4 younger siblings. My older sister, who we're full siblings, found each other 20 years ago, but she is not quite in that place and space to meet that. So I felt like really alone. So when Megan was talking about finding her people, I feel like this group of folks here in this book will really help me and others, I think. I actually wanted to get a copy for each one of our kids in my program for graduation we just did on Monday, but the book wasn't ready yet. So I still will be getting those books for our young people. So that'll be 20 books we'll be purchasing from C2I. I was wondering if we could get folks to sign those books somehow too. That would be really dope if we could do something like that.
I would think.
So anyways, but I think this is just amazing. You guys did an amazing job. I really wish I could have seen the play, but I'm really excited to read the full book. You guys are so talented. I love hearing the creative process too. Becca, I was just like, I want to know how her brain works. I'm like, that's so
Many of us
amazing.
want to know how Becca's brain works.
Yeah, and I'll drop our website in the chat. So if anyone's interested in learning more, I don't want to take up too much time because I want to hear what Michelle has to say too.
I actually have a question for you, just
Yeah.
before you go. I'm just wondering, in terms of like what you want people to know are the pressing issues for the youth that you work with. What do you think? What do you wish audiences knew?
Like Heidi
more?
said, okay, the next 8 hours we'll talk about that.
Yeah, right.
I think, goodness, I think just to be aware that this population exists. So like teens who are in and aging out of foster care, they're here. They age out of foster care without, support systems if they don't have a C2I or YMCA or Division of Indian Work or other organizations that are working with this young population. And that we are in desperate need of foster homes. I was adopted by a biracial and racial family. And so any loving home that will take a young person. I know some cultural groups will be like, we need Black homes, we need, to me, as long as it's a loving home, I mean, it's great to be matched with your culture and understand the young people, but we need foster homes. We need folks to, vote, for folks who are looking at housing equity for our young people who are aging out. We are building a place that's specifically for youth who are aging out of foster care, because finding housing and mental health are huge barriers for our young people. But yeah, if you want to become a foster parent or even a guardian ad litem or, even a respite care, if you're not sure if you want to have a young person in your home like permanently, but we just need folks to open their homes and just know that this population exists. Michelle can probably share a lot more on this situation too, but yeah, just know that they're there. We're looking for mentors. So if you want to be a mentor, that would be amazing as well. Yeah, there's so much that folks need to know. We're working with the state and the counties on some things right now because COVID really negatively impacted our young people. So trying to get, support back out to those young people, get them back into receiving services if they aged out during COVID, which never should have happened. So lots of stuff I could talk about, but.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jessica. I appreciate you joining us tonight and sharing, and yeah, looking forward to hearing more. And Michelle, yes, Michelle Chalmers, welcome. So good.
I apologize in advance for the wobbly thing. We had a staff event in somebody's backyard at the same time this was happening.
Yes.
So I'm getting lots of points. They all think I'm so impressive because I'm working, and this is so much fun that it's great that I'm getting credit for that.
And I should say you are with Ampersand Families, and why don't you tell us a little bit about Ampersand Families?
Yes, I am the co-founder and executive director at Ampersand Families, and we do permanency and adoption work with teenagers out of Minnesota's child welfare system. So kind of a slightly different twist on this conversation. And I think just the first thing I want to say is, so we were part of the discussion groups when they were putting together the idea of the play, and it was so cool to see that turn into the play, and then getting to read through the graphic novel. Becca, you did such a nice job with it. I mean, it was just really neat. And the way that you guys did the little video thing with it tonight, you captured one of my favorite parts, the court scene. I loved the way all of the different perspectives, and it felt super crazy making because it was, 20 people, each with their very own perspective and not very inclusive of the other perspectives and barely interacting or touching with any of the other perspectives. And I loved the death grip the Queen had on the two sisters. I think the thing about judgment and that it was beautiful. So thank you for that.
Mm.
So what else? What can I tell you?
Well, that's good. Thank you for sharing that. And Michelle, we know we've put more information about Ampersand in the chat. So if people want to find out more about your programming, that's available to them. There's a link there as well. But thank you so much for being a partner to this project and for being here tonight for this celebration.
Yeah. Can I give one last thought? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
So in terms of the work that I do, I think one of the pieces that I think is a really important piece of these conversations, and again, I think all of this is about relationship and family connections, and that human beings need to be connected places. And in the work we do in child welfare, kids aren't connected to their people because the state came in and took them away from them, and then works really, really hard to keep them away from their people. And I think, and I know, I mean, there's so many intersecting the Venn diagrams and different types of adoptions. There's a ton of overlap in there. And I think it's just really important to talk about those things. And in our work, a big piece of what we're doing is trying to restore relationships and connectedness with biological families. And so I think that's a whole nother ripple that I think got somewhat in the play, but I think that's yet another layer on this for kids who are in the child welfare system, came to this world of adoption from kind of a different way than some people, certainly not all.
Yeah, absolutely. Michelle, thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking
Thank
the time
you, Marianne.
out from your staff party to join us here tonight. That's awesome. Take care. Now, one of our other partners is Cub, Concerned United Birth Parents. And I believe Pat Glisky is here with us tonight. Pat, would you like to join me in the spotlight and share a few words about Cub?
Yes. First of all, I want to thank everybody for putting the play together. We were part of all the discussions, and we could not figure out how this play was going to be put together when we were in all those discussions. And then we went to the play, and it was amazing. So thank you, Alan and Leah. So I am a birth mother. I think everybody else is the other part of the triad. And during the 50s and 60s and 70s, most adoptions were closed. So there was a lot of shame, there was a lot of guilt, there was a lot of stigma that went with that. And of course, all birth certificates are sealed, and I still don't understand why they seal them. Just leave them open instead of amending them. So our group, we have a support group in Minnesota. I actually live in the Alexandria, Minnesota area, and I'm the regional director for the National organization. We have a retreat every year. We didn't have it last year because of COVID. And I don't think people really understood and never talked about the impact of adoption. It just has never been talked about. So to bring it, forward and to talk about it and to have a play about it and to put a novel together about it, it's amazing. And I think it will help a lot of people, because a lot of adoptees have these feelings and these emotions, and nobody really ever talked about it for years. Now we have open adoption, and that is supposed to be a little bit better. I think it is, because adoptive parents and birth parents can know each other, so that the child can know both of them, so they don't have to go searching years later. And our group does work with the Minnesota Adopt group on trying to get the law passed so that adult adoptees can have access to their original birth certificates and find their families. Because to be honest with you, everybody for the most part wants to know their story, where they came from, who they belong to, and who their people are, and their medical information. I mean,
of course, yeah,
it's a big deal. So again, thank you. I like when you do the audio reading. That was really cool because the first time I tried to read the novel, I tried to read it on my phone. That didn't work.
Yeah, much better in the actual book form. I recommend it.
So I'm anxious to get the actual book itself. Becky, you did a great job with. I don't know how people's brains work that can do that, but anyway. So thank you for having us be a partner with this, and we will be talking about it at our next group as well, because we've been meeting by Zoom too because of COVID.
Yeah.
COVID's kind of changed everything, but at the same time, I think it's been good for a lot of people because they got to do a lot of things they probably wouldn't have done otherwise.
And we got to have you here tonight, which we might not have had if we were doing it as an in-person live event. So that's great.
So thank you, all of you.
All right. Thank you, Pat, so much. Happy to have you here. And we have a couple more sponsors I'd like to thank briefly. MN Adopt is dedicated to supporting and sustaining families who adopt Minnesota waiting children by providing online resources and referrals to therapeutic and crisis services, support groups, adoption information, and comprehensive training opportunities. And then I'd also really like to thank our media sponsor, Rain Taxi. Rain Taxi champions aesthetically adventurous literature through publications, events, and service to the literary community. They're the ones behind the Twin Cities Book Festival each year, and just a great local literary resource, Rain Taxi. So now it's time to open up the floor to your questions. Let's bring back the whole panel, all of our special guest panelists this evening, as well as Wanderlust's managing director, Katie Bauer. Katie has been managing this show behind the scenes this evening and keeping everything going in the chat room. So Katie, I believe you are monitoring our questions this evening. I'm wondering what questions do you have for our panelists?
Yeah, thanks so much, Marianne. We do have one question from the audience. Here it is for anyone who'd like to answer it. There is a bill in the Minnesota legislation to allow adult adoptees to have an easier access to their original birth record. Does anyone have any thoughts either for or against this legislation, and why?
Well, yeah, and Pat just talked about having adoption records open, and I saw Leah raise her hand right away. Leah, what are your thoughts?
Yes, we're for it. We're totally for it. Let me be clear. I think it is complicated, and there's so many layers that we always say we can't tell all the stories of a community, some of the stories. And one area that we wish we could have gone deeper into is reunion and what that means and how complex that is. So I don't want to say that it's a simplistic answer, but as an adoptee, I'll say for myself, it's kind of infuriating that other people know more about where I come from and who I am than I'm allowed to know, because somewhere in a file cabinet, there is the information about where I come from and my medical history and who I'm connected to and what my culture is. To this day, I still don't know. I was told that I was placed for adoption in 1968, that I'm multiracial, and they can't even tell me what my race is. And so, I know almost everybody on this call is connected to the adoption community, so you probably know this, but just in case you don't, every single solitary time I go to the doctor and they say, do you have a family history of? I just go, I don't know. And that it feels really unfair to me. So I do think people should have access. Whether they choose to pursue it's a different thing. And the relationship of reunion, particularly after closed adoptions, can be really difficult. And I'm a big proponent of the organizations and the people who call themselves search angels, who often act as a mediator, who help make that relation happen slowly and at the pace that everybody can handle. And I do believe that reunion should largely be led by adoptees because we're the ones with the least control and choice in everything that has happened to us. And so we should get some control over that part of our lives.
Anybody else have something they'd like to add to that? Heidi?
Yes, I would just say that we also support adoptees having access to their records, and having served birth parents as well, we would want the state to publish that if that were going to happen, so that any birth parents who, we know that there are some situations and circumstances where there's safety risks, and their stories might include something where it would be putting their lives in some sort of risk. And so we would want the state to publish that so that those birth parents would have the ability to file their paperwork to keep that decision and that information confidential, should that be the case. So we definitely, and as an adoptee, understand that desire as well.
I'd like to read just a couple of the comments in the chat. Jessica with connection with C2I writes, having my original birth certificate was so comforting to me as a teen, just knowing my mom's name. It was actually sent to my parents by accident and found it by accident. My parents never openly shared it, even though I always knew I was adoption. Adam writes, I played Uncle Eddie in the play and I'm a birth father. I placed my birth son in an open adoption situation specifically so he would never be confused about where he came from or what his medical story is. Thank you both for those comments. Other thoughts as we wrap up the evening tonight? We have a few minutes left.
I think there's one more question.
Oh, yes.
Laura asked.
Lori Stern?
Yes. Laura Stern is an adopted mom of a Guatemalan-born son, and she asks, do you think the countries like Guatemala should reopen their programs? Was the corruption that bad? I expect that might be something Heidi knows more about than anyone else here.
What I would say, I saw that question come through as well, and I think it's a really good question. I think what we try and do, our best efforts right now with our international programs and for any adoption situation, is really make sure that all of the cases and countries and programs that we're working with are ethical, legal, and transparent. And those are really at the core of what needs to be in place for us to move forward. And again, we could talk about this for an hour, so feel free to contact me outside of this. But I think that's really what we want to do. And I think in order for kids to join families safely in the right ways and under the right circumstances, those three things need to be in place. So I guess it's a broad answer to a very specific question, but hopefully gives a little bit of consideration as to what goes into those decisions and relationships.
Great. And we have another question, a craft question for Becca. Did you take the script and use it verbatim, or did you rewrite the text for the graphic novel?
Good question. I was the bad cop in this situation. For the most part, it's verbatim. For the most part, it's exactly what was in the script. But there were a couple times where like a specific, like, oh, the white rabbit is standing in the dark hallway. Like, there were some things of that we knew we could extract because the pictures would paint that for us. But there were times that I was like, there's this, I'm not a writer. I that's not what I do. But I know that there's a phrase for authors called kill your darlings, which is where you're like, oh, wow, I want Harry Potter to talk for 7 more pages. But someone's like, J.K. Rowling, you got to kill that darling. He only needs to say it in 2 sentences. So there were times where I was like, Anna and Leah, we got to kill some darlings here. And they'd be like, oh, but when they said that, they were wearing this really nice sweater. And just like, then we had coffee afterwards. And I was like, I know, all these people are amazing. I went in that room with you for that conversation. So we can keep the kernel of what they were saying, but we got to like make it a little shorter. And I won some of those battles and I lost some of those battles, but it worked out.
That should be where it, I mean, that's the happy medium, right? You can't win them all. And then, no, so excellent. Well, it seems like just the right number of battles were won because I didn't notice anything missing.
All according to plan.
Yeah.
No, it's all in there.
Yeah. Anything else folks want to add before we wrap up for tonight? You've all done thank you so much for all of your work on this project and for everything you've shared this evening. This is obviously a very tender topic on so many levels, and you've really done just a wonderful job bringing about the production and now the book and doing it in a way that really honors community. Yes, Leah.
Always have a few more things to say. That's why Becca had to be the bad cop. But the one other thing I want to say, we've talked a lot about grief and we've talked a lot about loss and we've talked about judgment and all of these things. But the other thing is, I just want to say thank you to this community, all of you on the call and all the people who weren't able to be here. Because I think one of the things I discovered and that I hope people also discover as they begin to discover they are part of a community, is that everybody involved in adoption is a pretty generous soul. Regardless of which part of the triad you're on, it is a generous act to place a child. It is a generous act to adopt a child. It is a generous act to be a social worker who tries to make those connections happen. And every adoptee I have ever met is a generous soul who understands what it means to be an outsider. And so they tend to be really welcoming, generous people. So I have discovered this amazing community, frankly, a family that I feel more connected to than any other. So thanks.
Alan?
Yeah, just what happens with me and Leah. We always have one more thing. We could do this all night long talking to the other person. There's a speech at the end of the book that Uncle Eddie gives about how maybe everything that happened wasn't so great, but this moment here is love. And I wish that I had written it, but I didn't. Somebody said it in a story circle. Said that this is what brought us here. It was a person in the adoption community. And Wonderlust recently did another piece, a different piece that is related to this, but that was about grief and loss and resilience. And in that piece that Leah and Megan worked on, it talks about how if you feel the grief, you can also feel the joy more. And I think that when we talk about grief and trauma, that's one thing, but it also, it can lead to a lot more joy and love and all those things. And I think that's something that I learned just from being around this community, actually. So that's my last thought.
Beautiful note to end on. Congratulations to the Wonderlust team for taking a compelling play, taking it and transforming it into an equally compelling graphic novel. Thanks again to the many partners who played a role in bringing this story to life. I thought I'd end the evening with these words from the book. Oh my goodness, look at the time. Back from the rabbit hole, the clocks now chime. Before you return to hearth and home, please know you are not alone. Empty arms and broken hearts, unknown ancestors and secret parts. We're all on this journey doing our best. We're all confused and sometimes a mess. We are those we love, near and far. It is the loving that makes us who we are. I'll stop there and say, get the book. It's really good. So thank you so much to all of you. Have a wonderful rest of your evening and good night.